As we go to air tonight, Ukraine is under full-scale Russian assault. Explosions and air raid sirens have been heard in several Ukrainian cities, including the capital, Kiev. Russian missiles have blasted air bases and other military assets. The United Nations Secretary-General has begged Russia to withdraw its troops in the name of humanity. And the US President says Vladimir Putin has chosen a premeditated war that will bring catastrophic loss of life. Isabella Higgins begins our coverage from Lviv.
From the north to the south, Ukraine is under attack. Explosions were heard across the country before sunrise. This photo from the Ukrainian president's office showing an explosion in the capital. As air raid sirens rang out across Kiev, authorities confirmed Russian troops had crossed the border into the country. This video from Ukraine's border guard showing military tanks rolling into Ukraine along its northern border with Belarus. Vladimir Putin delivered this ominous message, seemingly as the first explosion was reported.
Circumstances require firm and immediate action from us. I decided to conduct a special military operation. Anyone who tries to stop us and threaten our country and people should know Russia's response will be immediate and lead to consequences you have never faced in your history. We are ready for any outcome.
The Russian president, who called on Ukrainian troops to lay down their arms, addressed his nation just before 6 a.m. as the United Nations Security Council held an emergency meeting at the request of Ukraine.
I have only one thing to say from the bottom of my heart. President Putin, stop your troops from attacking the Ukraine. Give peace a chance.
But it was too late. As morning broke, Ukraine's president declared martial law in the country.
Dear Ukrainians, this morning President Putin announced a special military operation in the Donbass. Russia has carried out strikes on our military infrastructure and border guards. We need each of you to be calm. If possible, stay at home.
I woke up and heard a series of shots. I rushed to the balcony and realised they weren't fireworks. People were running on the street.
Ukrainian tanks were deployed across the country as the nation's leader pledged to take any assault head-on. President Biden also confirming the US will coordinate with its NATO allies to ensure a strong and united response, releasing a statement saying President Putin had chosen a premeditated war and that Russia alone is responsible for the attack. Tens of thousands of Russian and Russian-backed troops are already in the eastern Ukraine regions of Donetsk and Luhansk, but many more are stationed in Crimea in the south and across the border in Belarus, north of the capital. Reports of explosions have been recorded in at least 5 Ukrainian cities, including the capital. Ukraine's airports have also been targeted. The Ukrainian airspace is now closed to commercial flights as shelling continues dangerously near the homes of residents. Ukrainians making a last-minute dash out of the country could have a long journey ahead of them.
And Isabella Higgins is live for us in the city of Lviv in the west of Ukraine. Isabella, many of those people we just saw fleeing the capital are heading to where you are. Is anywhere in Ukraine safe from attack?
Well, Juanita, that's very hard to say. Russia is obviously an incredibly powerful military force. We know that there are tens of thousands of troops on the eastern, northern and southern borders of this country. That's air, ground and sea forces. So while people are making their way here to the west of the country, which feels safer, that includes diplomatic staff, there are reports of shelling in this region not far from where I am here in Lviv. And certainly in this city, there are residents who are taking their own precautions, who are making preparations. There are very long lines for ATMs here as people try to get cash out. We're hearing about residents who are doing emergency firearms training to try and protect themselves. And we also have seen that there are already long lines at the Polish border. So it seems those that can leave Ukraine are choosing to do so.
Isabella, thank you. We'll come back to you shortly. When the first explosions started ringing out across Ukraine, one of our correspondents, Nick Dole, was on the ground in Kiev.
We're right in the heart of the Ukrainian capital. You can probably hear that air raid siren ringing out across the city. It's the first time we've heard that. Within about 10 minutes of Vladimir Putin's speech, you could hear some explosions. We heard about 4 or 5 in the first hour and then another big one about an hour later. There is generally a sense of calm here, but we are hearing warnings now for people to bunker in. There are shelters underneath the metro here. This city has some of the deepest metros in the world. They were built by the Soviets to withstand a US strike. So people are now having to make those decisions. Do they seek shelter or do they try to get out of the city altogether? Now, the airspace is closed now, so it's going to have to be by road, and with Russia surrounding much of Ukraine, people are going to be heading mostly west to Poland. So a very difficult situation for many Ukrainians waking up. There's been a lot of anxiety over the last few weeks about exactly what a Russian strike might look like, but for many Ukrainians, their worst fears are now being realised.
Nick Dole reporting there from Kiev. The streets of the capital appear a bit quieter now. These are live pictures of the city where it's just past 10 in the morning and -3 degrees. While Russian tanks were rolling across the border, Joe Biden was working the phones with world leaders. He briefed Ukraine's president on the United States' next moves as diplomatic efforts failed to stop Putin in his tracks. Here's North America correspondent Jade McMillan.
The UN Security Council hoped war could be averted with words.
There is no purgatory for war criminals. They go straight to hell, Ambassador.
But the pre-written pleas from diplomats were outdated as soon as they were delivered.
We're staring into the abyss of a major conflict in Ukraine, and a conflict that we know would have global implications.
Russia's attack on Ukraine is tantamount to an attack on the UN and every member state in the chamber tonight.
From the Russian representative came an alternate reality.
Those living in Donetsk and Luhansk are still sheltering in basements. The refugees are still flowing into Russia. The nature of the provocation by the Ukrainian military has not changed. You don't want to notice this, repeating the Ukrainian fairy tales.
A first round of Western sanctions failed to halt Russia's invasion plans, including Germany's decision to suspend the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline and American penalties against the company building it.
We have ensured that this is an $11 billion prize investment that is now a hunk of steel sitting at the bottom of the sea.
Are you going to toughen up sanctions, Prime Minister?
Threats from London to target Russian banks and oligarchs fell on deaf ears. Boris Johnson tweeted, President Putin has chosen a path of bloodshed and destruction by launching an unprovoked attack, warning the UK would respond decisively. Tonight, the US president is monitoring developments from the White House, praying, he says, for the Ukrainian people.
For weeks, the United States has been warning of severe and unprecedented consequences if Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Those measures are now on the way. Within hours, President Joe Biden will meet with G7 leaders before addressing the nation to announce a new set of sanctions in coordination with Western allies.
A vow to hold Russia accountable for an attack playing out almost exactly as the US had feared. Jade McMillan, ABC News, Washington.
Australia has unveiled new sanctions against Russia and the Prime Minister has vowed more will be announced in the coming days. Let's go to political reporter James Glenday in Canberra. James, what are these sanctions and will Russia care?
So, Anita, these new sanctions, and it's just the latest wave and more waves are to come, will target 25 Russians involved in the country's military, 4 entities involved in the supply of weapons, and the Prime Minister has even foreshadowed targeting some 300 members of the country's parliament. To your question, will the Kremlin care what we do? The answer is no, probably not. But Scott Morrison and many others here in Canberra believe that Vladimir Putin is trying to overturn the rules that Western countries and the world has lived by for decades, and that the way we respond now could have major ramifications for the way authoritarian countries both in Europe and indeed in our region act in the years and possibly decades to come.
This is a chilling reminder of the world that we live in and where the threats and aggression of bullies and those who seek to intimidate others to seek their own advantage. This is a reality, which means that like-minded countries, those who believe in a world that favours freedom, need to stand together.
Scott Morrison there. And Juanita, the local Ukrainian community around Australia is unsurprisingly horrified by what has happened today. Some have held vigils and rallies in major cities tonight, and they're again calling on the Morrison government to allocate extra humanitarian visas to allow more people, more Ukrainians, to leave Europe and to flee any fighting.
It's Glenn Day reporting there in Canberra. Let's go back now to Lviv in Ukraine. Isabella Higgins is still standing by. Isabella, if further sanctions fail to stop this invasion, what other options are left for the West?
Juanita, Ukraine is not part of the NATO military alliance, and the West have said up to this point that they will not be sending troops to this country. So what they've been doing have been sending forces to other nations in Eastern Europe like Romania and Poland that are part of the NATO military alliance. We're also hearing that the US is planning to send a deployment to Latvia in the coming days. Now, Ukraine has also called upon the West to not only impose harsher sanctions, it's also asking for more financial assistance, for military equipment. But for now, Ukraine really has to stand and face Russia's military might on its own.
Isabella Higgins reporting there.